Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1976. We're going to be taking a look at Roy Buchanan and he's going to be playing through Roy's Blues. So let's get Roy up on screen and see how he gets on.
Woman, you must be crazy. Why do you do these things to me? Woman, you must be crazy. Guess I'll never understand. You know I made love to another woman, 'cause I caught you making love to another man. Here I'll stand, baby. Still got the knife in my hand. Here I stand, baby. Still got the knife in my hand. Took care of you. Now I'm gonna take care of your lover man. Yeah, if I go to hell, I'm gonna speak very highly of you. If I go to hell, I'm gonna speak very highly of you. 'Cause you've done something, sweet mama. Yeah, I don't believe that the devil would do. Take it up while we get there.
I'm just going to jump in here because there's so much to talk about already. Just the delivery that Roy has with his vocal, but then also following that very strict pattern that we always have in the blues with top blues players, where we have that lead vocal that is the focus, and then the lead guitar, which is then the focus as well, that second voice. And it seems like in this performance that the main voice is that lead guitar, because you absolutely cannot ignore how upfront it is, but that's just down to Roy's playing and his tone, and just touching on the tone that Roy's got, because as you can see at the front of the stage, there's no multi-effects processors, no stomp boxes here. He was one of those guys that worked out his sound just purely through his guitar. A lot of people call Roy the master of the Telecaster. That name also is attributed to other players, but the way that Roy plays in terms of getting that tone from the guitar, he really was a master. And Roy has that ability to manufacture the tone with the guitar by finding those positions with the volume just rolling off to maybe 5 or 6 to just take a bit of that crunch out of the sound, but then opening up the taps if he wants to then get more of a gainy, overdriven sound like we go to in particular parts of this track. And this performance also flicking it straight down to the bridge pickup as well to get that aggressive sound, and something that will make it even easier for Roy to get those pinched harmonics that he sometimes throws in, and we have one or two in here. And the great thing about Roy and the pinched harmonics is that they're not overplayed. He just really throws them in there for dramatic effect. Sometimes in this video we don't get the best angle of performance. Sometimes we're behind Roy where we really want to see what's going on his fretboard, because during that section where we had those bends and he's simulating the sound of steel guitar, and that's what he started on. He started playing steel guitar before then moving on to the guitar that we can now see, the Telecaster. And if you don't know what steel guitar is when the guitar is in a horizontal position and you play with a slide, so you get those really smooth ascensions and descensions to notes, and Roy was simulating that with his playing, so it would have been great to see those bends in action. We've got the classic techniques on the left hand, hammer-ons, pull-offs, slides as well. Roy was so effective with his slides, as you can see, where he descends down his classic blues scale here, just throwaway lines that he throws in there. But also with that right hand, we'll be getting into it. We've got hybrid picking in there. We have the little chicken picking section as well that he just throws in. Really cool stuff. And also standard playing with a pick, just alternate picking. Any runs that you want to throw in there, Roy could do. And Roy started recording at the age of 19 when he worked with a guy called Dale Hawkins, and on one of Dale's tracks called My Baby, that's Roy playing lead guitar. He then moved over to Dale's cousin, who was called Ronnie, a couple of years later, and he played with Ronnie's band, but also was a tutor for Ronnie's guitar player, and that guitar player was Robbie Robertson. And then throughout the 1960s, Roy played with various rock bands. He would have been in his 20s throughout the 1960s, and he also had a growing family. So this meant, unfortunately, that he quit the music industry in order then to train as a hairdresser so that he could earn money that way, because at the time there wasn't a hell of a lot of money in music if you weren't that well known. He did do some session work in the 1960s as well, but it obviously wasn't enough to pay all the bills. And towards the tail end of the 60s, Roy was given a ticket to go and see Jimi Hendrix live. And when watching Jimi Hendrix, he realized that there were these pedals that could simulate exactly what he had been doing on his guitar, but Roy has spent years getting down these techniques in order to get a particular sound from his guitar. For example, with Jimi Hendrix, the one that stood out was the wah-wah pedal, which Roy had spent ages getting used to and perfecting, fading in and out the volume on his guitar, but also with the tone controls in order to get the guitar to sound like it was talking. And now it was something that you could just buy and use your foot to do it, and instantly you've got that sound rather than having to spend years getting it just from a guitar and an amp. And I think going to see Jimi Hendrix made Roy into a fan, first of all, because Roy then did covers of Jimi Hendrix tracks after that, but also it reinstated his belief in following his own path and doing things the way he wanted to, and just sounding like himself as a guitar player rather than trying to imitate anybody else. But Roy got back to music in the 1970s, and this would have made him in his early 30s. And first of all, he played with the Danny Denver Band, and they're a band in Washington, and they had a following there. But then in 1971, he was the subject of a documentary just called Introducing Roy Buchanan, and this gave him a lot more publicity, obviously, which then brought him to the attention of Polydor Records, who he signed a deal with, and so many guys could then see Roy and appreciate his playing. One of those was John Lennon, who said some very nice things about Roy's playing. It was also alleged that Roy was offered the lead guitarist position in the Rolling Stones, but he turned them down. So after that point, he had the nickname as the man who turned the Stones down. But let's get back into the video and see where Roy takes this next lead section. we have it. And that last shot is such a great shot of the audience because we can see that this track goes on for almost 8 minutes, but by the end, Roy's got everybody on his side because of how entertaining he is when he plays, but the techniques that he throws in there as well. We could see when he went over and had a drink, that showmanship side. Roy has got that top technical ability so that guys in the audience who do play guitar can just be impressed with the amount of techniques that Roy goes through, but then he does apply that rasgueado technique, flamenco guitar with the right hand, which is where you fan the fingers, and that's what Roy's doing at the end. And I think he was doing it earlier in the solo, but unfortunately we were behind him, so we couldn't really see that technique going on. But there's a guy in the audience who then started clapping because it's really impressive to see these different techniques come together, especially on a telly, because he's playing the blues here, but he's bringing so many techniques together. Also, the harmonic pinches, which are subtle. The one that really sticks out was at 3 minutes and 45 seconds, so rewind it if you want to, just to hear that in full flow. But getting back to his recording, in the early to mid 70s is when Roy was recording with Polydor, and he had 5 albums there, and one of those went gold. He then moved over to Atlantic Records and did 3 more albums, and his album called Loading Zone in 1977 also went gold. So throughout the 70s, Roy did get some attention and he did get some sales, but didn't really break into the big time. So then in 1981, Roy came out and said that he was going to quit recording because he didn't want to do any more recording until he was allowed to record the way he wanted to and have no limitations on his sound. So maybe during those albums in the 70s, the record label were having a say as to how he was going to sound, and Roy might have wanted to sound a different way, and this is something that happens all the time with big record labels. So 4 years later, in 1985, Roy was tempted back into the studio by Alligator Records. This would have made Roy 46 at the time, and they gave him that artistic freedom that he craved, so he released an album with them in 85, 86 and 87. And that third album, called Hot Wires in 1987, unfortunately was Roy's last album because the story takes a tragic turn. In 1988, Roy was arrested for a public intoxication offence. I think it was to do with a domestic disturbance or dispute that he had, and unfortunately he was found hanged in his cell, and the official cause of death was suicide, but this was disputed by some friends and family who said that he had bruising on his head as well. So it's one of those sad ends to a story, and such a talented guitarist as we can see in this video. But Roy Buchanan, one of those top players who in the 60s and 70s might have flown under a lot of people's radars because he didn't get that mainstream exposure. But it's great that we can look at videos like this and see how many techniques he had mastery of, and look at his control, but also his sound, and the fact that he got his tone just from a Fender Tele and also a Fender Vibrolux amp. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.